Morning, it's the 22nd of January 2019. So I've just had a meeting with MAEVON, who is part of the BONOBO experience, and we're going to collaborate in a festival in Berlin called Stretch, and we are wanting to develop some new content. So we had a discussion about how we could do that. So we are going to model a bonobo culture, and we're going to model a chimp culture, and between these two cultures we're going to identify the polarities, the differences that enable this one to function and this one to function, and the outcomes of those behaviours that enable these two very different primate cultures to function. So chimps are much more likely to be aggressive. Although they can display kindness, they're much more likely to be aggressive and dominate the females. The males dominate the females. There's a patriarch that dominates over everybody, and that determines his offspring, so he knows that the youngsters are his. Bonobo culture is very different. It's very much a archaic sexual structure, so nobody knows who the children belong to. The females don't know who the fathers are. The fathers don't know who the children belong to. So the males are much less likely, and indeed don't, form allegiances to overthrow the matriarch. So we're going to set up these two very different cultures, and then we're going to provide the opportunity for members of each group to establish and understand and immerse themselves in that specific culture, and then they would eventually move round and go into the other culture. So say this is bonobo, say this is chimp, say there's 5 people within each one. They would all experience what it's like to grow and become leader of that group. For instance, this is an idea. So someone would enter this group, they would become the baby, so the little finger, say, and over time they would work their way up to being the matriarch, the dominant female, for instance. Once they become the dominant female and see what it's like to grow up in this culture and be held and loved and nurtured, and then be able to use that wisdom to enable this group to function, then they go into, then once they've become the matriarch and have experienced that, then they move into the grey area, this space in between both of them, where they can actually get back into what it's like to be them, process that, leave it behind, and give themselves a bit of time to move into the chimp environment. And once they've done that, then it just breaks these two up so that they're not jarring immediately with each other, so that the human can look and start to see from the outside what it was like to be in there and what it's like to go in there. Then they go into the chimp environment as a youngster. So maybe they're born, they learn what it's like to fight their way to the top, and then eventually they will get to dominate their chimp society as king, perhaps. So you know, a male and female patriarch, matriarch, and what it's like to move in the entirety of those two spaces, and people can reflect on that. It's like, okay, well, this is a very kind of upfront, in your face, aggressive environment. This is much more caring, compassionate. It does have the potential for violence, but because they've come up with strategies of sex and touch and care, those things never become dangerous. So you get to go into both of these societies, and we can draw parallels with that. I mean, we wouldn't want to intellectualize it too much, but we could certainly say, well, what's it like for a queer person or an LGBT person who essentially grows up into a straight family, for instance, and how they have to navigate through that, how they have to pretend maybe to be a chimp in that environment. And I'm not saying that the family structure is necessarily aggressive or dominant, but it is dominated by wider culture, which is much more, well, patriarchal nuclear family, not matriarchal kind of community-based environment. So there's certain things that you can sort of draw parallels with, you know, even with politics. You can say, well, this is a dictatorship, this is archaic, and you could move into those sorts of ways of thinking. But essentially what we're wanting to do is sort of get people to experience behaviours that are very pro-cooperation and very pro-competition, and how those two things play out. We could set up games that enable bonobos or chimps in their separate groups to work out how to cooperate, because there's been tests, there's been experiments by scientists that show that bonobos can certainly cooperate and get to something if they use teamwork to get to a goal. They're very patient. Play enables them to revisit and test and have another go and have a, you know, let's get a better mindset over getting frustrated, which is what the chimps do. The chimps are they get very frustrated very quickly, you know, they're very serious, and if something's not happening straight away, then they kind of lose their temper. So we can work with those sorts of ideas when we're going to be bringing this into a workshop environment, and then bring this component into a longer retreat. So that's kind of where we're at with the preliminary ideas around this new workshop and this new collaboration that MAEVON and I are looking at. So thank you very much. Speak again soon.